Hello class, I hope you're all doing well. Happy Wednesday. So, we have been learning about some strategies that we can use when nonfiction historical texts feel a little bit too hard. So we're actually going to keep using that same strategy today. We practiced it on Monday, Tuesday, and now we're going to practice it again because I think it's really helpful for you. So, to remind you, this strategy has 3 parts. We do some hard work before we start. We preview the whole text. Then we do some hard work while we're reading. We stop after each chunk and retell in our own words what we just read. Then finally at the end, we do a little bit more hard work and we summarize the whole thing. Put all those pieces, all those chunks of information together. So today we're going to practice this in chapter 12 called The Fighting Begins. So right now I want you to follow along in that social studies chapter. It's attached to your assignment. So go ahead and get that ready. All right, let's do this. So also I want to remind you that when you're watching a video of your teachers, you can pause the video if you need more time. If we go too fast, so that's actually something pretty awesome because in school you can't just pause Miss Cone, but now you can, which is super helpful sometimes. So don't forget about that. So let's preview this text, all right? Turn to page 1. So I see the title is The Fighting Begins. I'm thinking that the colonists are definitely going to start some kind of fight. I'm not sure why, but I'm definitely thinking there's going to be some fighting because that's the title. Now let's look at this bold heading. It says, maybe this and maybe that. This makes me think that there's some uncertainty. People aren't totally sure what's happening. Maybe some soldiers are having some regrets. I'm not really sure, but it kind of seems like no one's too sure. We'll find out. Now, let's look at this big question. What was Patrick Henry's point of view? Okay, so if this is the big question at the beginning of the chapter, I'm thinking again that this might be part of the main idea, the answer to this question. So I'm remembering that point of view is the way that you see the world. It's your view of the world. So, for example, my point of view about school is that school is fun. This might not be how you see school, but that's how I see it. So we have to think about Patrick Henry's point of view. How is he seeing something? All right, let's go down to page 2. I see a big picture. If it takes up the whole page, I'm thinking it must be super important, this picture. I also see a caption at the bottom, a little bold one. It says, Patrick Henry was a very persuasive speaker. Virginians responded to Patrick Henry's "Give me liberty or give me death" speech. So if someone is super persuasive, that means they can convince you to do something. So it seems like all the colonists are really going to be listening to this man, this Patrick Henry. We don't know much about him yet, but I'm thinking that people are really listening to what he has to say. Let's turn to the next page. All right, so I see a vocabulary box with the word brethren. A brethren is a member of your family or a group. Sometimes people kind of use it like the word brother. It's kind of where that comes from. So this makes me think that the colonists are going to come together almost like a family, like brothers. I also see these 2 big scrolls. That's what we call those. And before we had paper like that perfectly, printed white paper that you see that we give you, that didn't always exist. So we used to have something that looked a little bit more like this. And this has a speech written on it. So I'm thinking that maybe that's the speech that Patrick Henry was giving that was so persuasive. I'm already starting to connect these parts. Let's see, scroll to the next page. All right, I see 2 vocabulary boxes on this page. The first has the word Minutemen. So Minutemen, these were people who were not trained fighters, but they were volunteering to help the American colonists, to help the army. And the reason they're called Minutemen is because they weren't trained, but they didn't matter. They were ready to fight in 1 minute. Said, I need you. And they said, okay, 1 minute, and they're ready to go. The second phrase that I see down here in a vocabulary box, remember it's not a word, it has more than one, so it's a phrase. Kill two birds with one stone. So you might have heard this before. This means pretty much just to get two things done at the same time. So I'm wondering if maybe the colonists are going to win two battles at the same time. Not really sure, but I'm thinking there are going to be two things happening here. We'll have to read on and figure out. Let's head down to the next page. I see a bold heading that says Paul Revere's Ride. I'm wondering where he's riding to. I'm not so sure. Definitely some action happening though. Then on the right, I see a vocabulary box with the word redcoat. So this word, you're going to hear it a lot, was used to describe the British soldiers because they literally wore red coats. The redcoats, they also are going to be called loyalists. So redcoats are loyalists. There are lots of different words for the British Army, and those are two of them. They're called loyalists because they're staying loyal to that king, who the colonists, some of them think he's evil, but they're staying loyal to him. The American soldiers, they were bluecoats. They called themselves patriots, and they think that king is evil. They are not staying loyal to him. No way. He's going to tax us. All right, let's go to the next page. I see a picture with the caption, Paul Revere warned colonists that the British were on the way. This must be the ride that heading was talking about, Paul Revere's Ride. It's all coming together. Maybe this is why the name of the chapter is The Fighting Begins, because he's warning them that it's coming. I see another bold heading that says the Battle of Lexington. The Battle at Lexington. That's an important word. The colonists must be at a place called Lexington. Where? Lexington. Lastly, I see a vocabulary box with the word village, or the words village green. A village green is kind of an open grassy area in the middle of a town or a city. So I'm guessing that this battle took place on a village green in Lexington. That's what I'm starting to think. Let's turn to that next page. All right, I see a vocabulary box with two words. The first word says stockpile. A stockpile is a large amount of something that is stored for the future. So I guess either the redcoats or the colonists are going to have some extra materials that need to be stored. I'm not totally sure yet. The second word is unfurl. So to unfurl means to unroll something or spread it out. I'm not totally sure what they're going to spread out, but I know that's coming. Okay, I don't see any more text features. Oh, wait a minute. I see another something that looks kind of like a scroll we saw before. Almost skipped over it. So below it, it says, many years later, Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote a poem to be read at a memorial ceremony celebrating the Battle of Concord. This is the first stanza. Oh, okay. So now I know there was a second battle, probably at a place called Concord. And since they're celebrating something, I'm thinking maybe they won it? This is bringing me back to that phrase, kill two birds with one stone. Maybe they won Lexington and Concord, like those were the two stones? Not too sure yet. All right. I feel prepared to read this chapter now. Let's get started, okay? We're going to head all the way back to the top and get started. Here we go. Follow along with me. Page 1. Maybe this and maybe that. Maybe if King George III had paid attention to the colonists' pleas, maybe if the British government had taken its troops out of the colonies, remember that was the Intolerable Acts. Maybe if many things had happened, war might have been prevented. Or maybe not. Maybe by that time, the colonists had gone too far down the road toward independence to turn back. No one knows for sure, what might have happened. We do know what did happen. By the start of 1775, when more and more colonists expected the quarrels with the mother country to lead to war, so like the quarrels, the fights. By spring, the militias in many colonies were preparing to fight. Each militia was made up of citizens who volunteered to be part-time soldiers. I'm going to pause. So it seems like there are a lot of things that people weren't sure about. Maybe there was a way to stop the war, but we're thinking, we're not totally sure, so we're just going to learn about this war. And it seems like everyone's prepared to fight for their freedom. They're joining together, this new identity. We're Americans. We're not just colonists from separate places. We're Americans. Let's read on. In March, members of the Virginia General Assembly debated whether their colony should prepare for war as well. Some opposed the idea. Remember, opposed is to be against. But Patrick Henry believed that the time had come for action. Everyone at the meeting knew Henry was a great speaker. I'm going to pause. Okay, so what was Henry's point of view? Patrick Henry's point of view was that we should fight. I want to learn more. I wonder why he thinks they need to fight. Here's my big picture. I see Patrick Henry talking about his wanting to fight. All right, we'll go to the next page. When he stood to address the members, a hush fell over the room. Some of the earlier speakers had said that maybe Britain would still change its mind. Patrick Henry responded. So some people are saying, wait a minute, what if we don't need to fight? What if we can just convince the king to let us be free? Patrick Henry's going to give a different speech. Listen up. Shall we try argument? Sir, we've been trying that for the last 10 years. We must fight. Gentlemen may cry peace. Peace, but there is no peace. The war is actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. We stand here idle? What is it the gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God! Then Patrick Henry stood tall. He raised his arms high, his voice clear as a bell. He finished with words that would have stirred lovers of liberty ever since. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. I'm going to pause there because those are some really powerful words and some confusing ones. So I'm thinking about the main idea of this chapter to help me understand this confusing speech. So it sounds like Patrick Henry would rather fight than feel like a slave in America. And then I'm thinking, wait a minute, what does he mean a slave? He means that he feels like a slave to this British king who's so far away, but making all these rules? He feels like a slave. He's saying the colonists must do whatever it takes to be free from this British king. He takes it so far that he says, give me liberty or give me death. Liberty is another word for freedom. So he's saying, if I can't be free, I'd rather be dead. Wow, he feels really strongly about going to war. Let's go to the next page. Patrick Henry was wrong when he said that the war had begun. 3 weeks after his speech, the real fighting began. For people who several months, militias in Massachusetts had been training to fight. These farmers and townspeople called themselves Minutemen because they could be ready to fight on a minute's notice. To prepare for battle, the Minutemen had been collecting guns, gunpowder, and other supplies. They hid these supplies in the village of Concord, about 15 miles northwest of Boston. Remember that the British sent an army general to serve as the governor of Massachusetts? The new governor was General Thomas Gage. General Gage learned about those hidden supplies in Concord. He also learned that two Sons of Liberty, Sam Adams and John Hancock, were hiding in the town of Lexington. Lexington was on the way to Concord. General Gage figured he could kill two birds with one stone. He would send his soldiers to Lexington, first to capture Adams and Hancock. The soldiers would then continue on to Concord and take the Minutemen's hidden supplies. I'm going to pause there. That was a lot of information. So actually, I was wrong. So that's why we always have to read so closely. The phrase was referring to the British Army. They're trying to kill two birds with one stone. They think they can win this battle at Lexington and then another battle at Concord and steal all of the colonists' materials and supplies. I hope not. Let's see. General Gage planned for his soldiers to leave Boston in the dead of night. That way, no one would notice. They would take Lexington by surprise. But the Sons of Liberty found out about his plan. Two Sons of Liberty, Paul Revere and William Dawes, got ready to ride ahead of the British soldiers and warn citizens along the way. Gonna pause. So the British, they're trying to be sneaky. They're trying to go in the middle of the night. They're trying to go a sneak attack on the colonists in Lexington, and they go to Concord, steal all their materials. But they're not gonna get away with this. There's these two American people, Paul Revere and William Dawes, and they heard about this plan. So they're gonna try to rush ahead and tell the colonists about this plan so they're ready to fight. Let's read on. Paul Revere's ride. I'm curious what this ride's all about. There were two routes to Lexington. Which one would the redcoats take? Remember, those are the British. The first route was longer, but it was entirely overland. The shorter route required that the troops first cross the Charles River by rowboat before starting their overland march. William Dawes started out along the long route to Lexington. As he went, he called out to Patriot homes that the redcoats were on their way. Paul Revere hung back in case the British decided to cross the Charles River. He had already arranged for a young man to signal to the Sons of Liberty waiting on the opposite shore. From the tower of the Old North Church in Boston, the young man would hang one lantern if the British were traveling by land. He would hang two lanterns if they were traveling by water. I'm going to pause. So, it seems like these two Sons of Liberty, these men, have a plan. They got a plan to stop the British. The British can go one way or another. They're not sure, so they're going to split up and each guard one of the routes. And they created a system. They have this signal, a lantern, which is like a light, to let the other colonists know which way the British are going. Very smart. Let's read on. When Paul Revere realized the British were planning to row across the river, he passed along the information to the signaler. That night, two lanterns burned brightly in the tower of the Old North Church. The British would be coming by water. Paul Revere and two friends hurried to a hidden rowboat. They rowed across the water ahead of the British troops. Once on shore, Revere borrowed a horse from another Son of Liberty. He then galloped off to carry the warning to Lexington and Concord. There's a picture of him galloping off. Now we know where he's going. Stopping at every village and farm, he pounded on doors and sounded the alarm. Many people believe that Paul Revere shouted, "The British are coming!" or "The redcoats are coming!" It's more likely, though, that his warning cry was, "The regulars are coming!" A regular was another name for a British soldier. Oof, they've got so many names. Revere never made it to Concord, but he was able to warn Sam Adams and John Hancock in Lexington. The two men escaped before the British arrived. I'm going to pause. Wow. Paul Revere was a real hero. He risked his life to warn the other colonists that the British were coming. It seems like he was successful. He was able to warn them. Let's read on. The Battle at Lexington. British troops arrived in Lexington at dawn, expecting to see no one. Instead, they saw 70 Minutemen facing them on the village green. The leader of the Minutemen, Captain John Parker, told his men, "Stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon." Then he added, "But if they mean to have war, let it begin here." There they stood. On the one side were 600 to 700 well-trained, well-armed soldiers in handsome uniforms. On the other was a much smaller group in rough dress and with fewer weapons. The British officers ordered the Minutemen to leave. I'm gonna pause. So the two different armies are right here standing next to each other. Nothing has happened yet. It seems like the British army, though, is a lot bigger and pretty scary. Suddenly, someone opened fire. Both sides started shooting. Within minutes, 8 Minutemen were dead, and another 10 lay wounded. Never mind. Whew, that was quick. It seems like the British won that battle of Lexington within seconds. Let's read on. The British caught both William Dawes and Paul Revere before they could get to Concord. However, another patriot named Dr. Samuel Prescott rode off with the warning of a British attack. So Paul Revere and his partner were stopped. They were able to pass it to a different Son of Liberty to pass it on. The British troops next pushed on to Concord. They expected to find the hidden stockpile of weapons. However, the colonists had moved most of their supplies. This did not stop the British from destroying what little they did find. Once again, the British were surprised to find Minutemen waiting for them. This time, there were nearly 400 of them gathered at the North Bridge near the Concord Village Green. They're getting more prepared with each battle. Soldiers at the bridge opened fire. Minutemen fired back. After 5 minutes of fighting, the British decided to return to Boston. Wow. So Paul Revere was able to keep moving and warn the colonists in another place too, even if he couldn't get there. The British definitely were not expecting the colonists to be so well prepared. It looks like the colonists won this fight. That's really impressive. Their army was not as well trained. Let's read on. That long march back to Boston became a nightmare for the British soldiers. Paul Revere had alerted all of the people living along the route. They had watched the British march toward Lexington in the early morning hours. Now, they waited behind stone fences, barns, and trees for the British to return. In their bright red uniforms, the soldiers were easy targets. Shots rang out along the route. Before the British got back to Boston that night, the Minutemen killed 73 soldiers and wounded another 200. That was nearly half of the number of soldiers who had set out for Lexington and Concord earlier that day. The colonists suffered losses too. Nearly 50 men died. The Americans did not know it at the time, but the war for independence had officially begun. Pause. Wow, it seems like this is the war we've been hearing about. So the British won the first one. They won that battle at Lexington, but the colonists came back to fight and won the Battle of Concord. That was a lot of hard work. Now we're up to our last step. Let's connect all those little pieces together before I let you go. All right. So we started with a man named Paul Henry. He gave a speech that later became famous. He said, "Give me liberty or give me death." So he convinced the colonists that it was better to die fighting than it was to be a slave to the British king. Wow, he really persuaded them. He convinced them. Then, as we read on, we met this guy, Paul Revere. He's famous for warning the colonists about the British. That phrase, the British are coming, is actually quite famous. At the first battle, even though those Minutemen were warned and ready, it seems like they weren't ready enough and the British still won. But then that news traveled fast and the colonists prepared even more. Finally, the chapter ended when the colonists won the battle at Concord. Okay, I think I did a lot of hard work and now I understand that chapter. I want you to go off. If you need to reread, I think that's a good idea. We know that rereading always helps us understand. Then you're going to jot down your boxes and bullets for who, what, when, and where. You know the deal. All right, off you go.